Hello, welcome Paula Hawkins. Thank you very much for joining us today to talk about your much anticipated new novel, Into the Water. I'm going to start by asking you a question that you've probably already been asked before, because it's a question that many authors who have a massive hit are then asked with the second novel, is that was there much pressure really writing a book that would follow on from one that everyone seemed to have read?
Well, yes, a little. Obviously it makes it a quite a daunting prospect to when you've had a huge success. There's a big readership out there that are waiting for the next thing. So yeah, that adds a certain level of pressure. But I think that's not necessarily a bad thing.
This book, as well as The Girl on the Train, deals with the idea of people's memories and that being a major thing with memories coming to the surface. What is it about that subject that interests you?
I'm fascinated by memory and by the way memory works. And yes, I talk about it in Into the Water in a very different way than I did from The Girl on the Train. The Girl on the Train is very straightforward. Her memory problem is about her drinking. In this book, I'm more looking at how we can misremember things from our childhood, or we can tell stories about our lives that actually turn out to not be quite true. So we sort of create almost creating new memories for yourself. And I'm sure that lots of people have had this experience where you'll be talking to somebody in your family about, a day you spent at the beach when you were a child, and then someone else will say, oh, no, it didn't happen like that. Or you weren't even there, you just seen a photograph of it. And then it's so disconcerting because you could have sworn you remember this thing. So that's the kind of shift in memory that I'm talking about in Into the Water.
Now, The Girl on the Train was your debut thriller, but you previously published a number of novels under a different name, which were very different in tone. I wondered how much of a different experience is it writing books that are much lighter and where happier things happen to people rather than darker things that occur?
Well, I wasn't very good at the happy side of things, so this is why I think I moved to writing psychological suspense, because in my previous romantic comedy novels kept getting darker and darker, and more terrible things kept happening to everyone. That's just what I'm more interested in. I do tragedy better than I do comedy, so actually writing about miserable subjects is much more my cup of tea.
I was interested that Into the Water actually to some extent reminded me of your 2013 novel The Reunion, which was published under Amy Silver, where it's a group of people with kind of like collective secrets that very quickly start to rise to the surface, and in a very kind of claustrophobic environment as well, particularly the town in Into the Water. I was wondering if spending all that time in a claustrophobic environment in your head with all these secrets ever gets a bit much when you're trying to think of all the different motives and that kind of thing.
Well, I quite enjoy immersing myself in that sort of thing, but it's a complex book, and as you say, there are lots of characters and lots of secrets. So keeping all those things bubbling under wasn't always easy. Keeping it all straight in my head, plotting it out was a tricky prospect.
It was interesting because there's a character in your book that mentions at one point, seriously, how is anyone supposed to keep track of all the bodies around here? It's like Midsummer Murders. And I wondered, it's quite amazing how you do manage to keep the reader completely on track with what's happening while keeping mystery. Do you ever have a sense of like, oh goodness, who killed who? Or...
Well, the thing is, there are lots of bodies in the book, but they actually, if you look at it, the time scale, the whole time scale is actually huge. So people aren't just dropping like flies everywhere. I do know who's guilty where, but yes, I understand that it can look a little bit convoluted at the start.
I was also interested at the start, actually. There was a point where I thought it was going to go in the realm of the police procedural, and then that is kind of merged into the background more, and the characters, the real characters of the people who aren't the investigators, become very much more to the forefront. Are you more interested in looking at the people that aren't the investigators, or how does that?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't really want to write a police procedural. The police needed to be there, obviously, because there's been a suspicious death, and they are a part of it. But the procedure wasn't the bit that I wanted to focus on. I wanted to focus on the other stuff that was happening, and the people who live in the town, the families, the people who are connected to these crimes in other sorts of ways. However, I thought it was obviously we needed the police, and I wanted. There is one character, Erin, who's a detective who is an outsider. She's come in. She's the one who reckons it's like Midsummer Murders. She's looking at this place from the outside. She's almost like holding the reader's hand as we go through and meet all these strange characters.
Now, the author S.J. Watson commented after seeing the film of his novel Before I Go to Sleep that perhaps subconsciously with his second book he may have been a little bit more cinematic in the way he pitched scenes and certain aspects of it. And I wondered if having worked with the making of the film of The Girl on the Train with Emily Blunt, which was a big success, whether that you felt had an influence at all on the way you approached the writing of this second book.
I don't think so. I mean, I didn't see the film, I didn't see The Girl on the Train until quite late. I'd already written most of this book. There are aspects of it that I think are very cinematic, but I think there were aspects of The Girl on the Train that were as well. I don't actually have that incredibly visual imagination. I think this book, I mean, I think there are, as I said, aspects of it are cinematic, but that certainly isn't in the forefront of my mind.
As we mentioned, The Girl on the Train did capture the imagination of many people, and there are loads of books out on the shelves that literally have the words perfect for fans of The Girl on the Train. Do you ever find it odd when you see your novel referenced in such a way on the cover?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because, you're used to it being in reference to other people's books, so yes, it is very strange to see. But yeah, it's a huge compliment, and it's great that it's been, that it's a book that people uses sort of a touchstone, about the sort of a certain sort of psychological suspense.
And we're talking about the certain sort of thriller or crime thriller. Many phrases are thrown around, particularly between publishers and booksellers, about popular fiction and literary fiction and genre fiction and that kind of thing. Do you think those terms are helpful, or do you think they can sometimes get in the way of both writers and readers?
I'm not sure that readers are that concerned about them, or most readers. Perhaps certain sorts of readers care about those labels. Personally, I'm not sure that I do find them helpful. I think there are so many things that cross the borders between literary and genre and popular and what have you. I think there are lots of books that are quite difficult to actually stick in one of those categories, or which would fit in many of those categories. So while I understand completely why booksellers and publishers do it, and I do it myself, I'm not sure that it's always that helpful, particularly to the reader.
Now, I was interested that you were born and raised in Zimbabwe,
yes.
I understand, and have lived in lots of different cities throughout your life. And in your two thrillers, the sense of the outsider is quite profound. And I wondered if you had a sense of the outsider's eye when you were writing about looking on different, the way people live and that side of life.
Definitely, I definitely have a sort of outsider feeling. As you said, I grew up in Zimbabwe, then I moved to London when I was 17, and I definitely felt sort of, like I was outside of society looking in. And I think I've always felt that a bit. I'm one of those people who likes to sort of sit back, who's not necessarily at the heart of things, who doesn't like to be the centre of attention, actually. So this is quite difficult for me. But I am the kind of person who'd rather be watching quietly from the sidelines.
And finally, we've touched on this slightly with the idea of books being referenced to The Girl on the Train, but there is at the moment, it seems to be a huge appetite for domestic thrillers, and particularly female domestic thrillers. And you and you're probably tired of the comparison, but also Gillian Flynn with Gone Girl seem to be at the forefront of this. Where do you think this appetite has come from? Why do you think people are so hungry for these kind of books?
I imagine actually that appetite's always been there. I think when you have a book like Gone Girl that's so hugely successful, then you have publishers and agents and the media all start to look for similar things in that genre, and they get pushed to the fore. But I actually think the appetite's probably always been there. Now it's just being catered for, and we're seeing it not just in books, but on television as well. There's things like Big Little Lies, which is Leanne Moriarty's book, which is being televised at the moment, which is fantastic, and that's all about domestic life and family, and it's taking women's lives. The reality of women's lives very seriously, and I think, women read fiction, women read crime fiction, so that's why I think.
Paula Hawkins, thank you very much for joining us today about Into the Water.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.